Good evening, and welcome to an extra spooky episode of Graphic Policy Radio, the podcast for fans who plan on reusing this year's Rebel Alliance Halloween costumes when they help take people to the polls on Election Day, which in fact is on Tuesday. I actually was going to make a joke about dressing up as Orange Lantern Trump instead of Larfleeze, but I do want to emphasize that in most states in America, there is an election on Tuesday, not tomorrow, Halloween, but the first Tuesday of November. And in order to defeat the lantern of avarice and greed, we actually need to win state government elections. And that means everyone voting in races for state houses on November 7th. So please do that. That's important. You can do that in costume or out. The choice is yours. Speaking of knocking on your neighbor's doors in a great civic tradition, tomorrow is in fact Halloween, which is why I have a special guest on the show to talk about this. It's a new series, Moonlighters. We're joined by Katie Schenkel, who's the writer of the new young adult series, Moonlighters. It's about a high-achieving college student, Renee, who is bitten by a werewolf, and things take a turn for the weird. She ends up with the Moonlighters, monster helpers for hire, made up of Meg, who is a Were-Huskie, Sue, who is a Were-Akita, and Felipe, who is a Were-Corgi. They have to take supernatural odd jobs to pay for textbooks, ramen, and rent. Please hire them. It's written by Katie with art by Cal Moray and published by Space Goat Productions. Moonlighters is an indie comic season. We definitely want you to check out this Halloween season. Hello, Katie.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Did I get your last name's pronunciation correctly?
You were real close. I usually tell people it rhymes with ankle, and that's...
Oh.
So, Schenkel.
Got it. Okay.
You're real
Katie
close,
Schenkel.
though.
So close. So this is a comic that I've been really excited to have come out because I've been a fan of your critical writing for a long time.
Thank you.
Folks who might not know, Katie wrote for Comics Alliance and has a really great Steven Universe podcast with Elle Collins, and you write for the Mary Sue, and and I just have always liked your critical work a great deal. And I'm a big fan of the story of a critics turn pro, as it were, when it comes to writing comics fiction. So I would love to get the story of how Moonlighters came to be.
It's funny. This Wednesday, which is when issue 4 comes out, will mark the exact year since I got an email from JD. See, you asked me how to pronounce my name, and I realized I always forget how to pronounce my editor's name. But JD Boucher, and I apologize, JD, if I messed that up, but saying, hey, we have this kind of basic concept for this book about werewolves going to college and doing odd jobs for the monsters in their community. And we like your point of view, and we know that, and they knew that I have another book coming up that had been bought, and they said, would you like to pitch for it? And I was just thinking, like, well, that does sound really interesting, and yeah, like, give me more information what you were looking for. And they sent me over kind of a little mini dossier of their general ideas and what they definitely wanted, and in terms of the tone, but also in terms of the representation that they definitely wanted in, which was they wanted the cast to be characters of color, and they specifically asked for LGBTQA cast with at least one character being an ace person. And immediately, that was what really got my attention. And I went, I immediately wanted... my interest in this potential project just went up 100%. So it from there, I took kind of what they had built up, because they had some kind of basic ideas for the characters, and I built off of that. And by the time I had sent them the pitch, I was thinking, man, I really, really want this. I really, really want to get this project. And I think within a few days, they came back to me and said, yeah, if you're game, we are too. We love this. So that was kind of my, and that was back in, I think it was late November by that point. I think it was just about a month of a process between when I first got the email and when I got it out. And I mean, speaking of elections, that was a really stressful time for like all of us. But so it was nice to have that distraction, and it was another thing that in the early days of working with JD really spoke to me about the kind of people I'd be working with was I had just gotten kind of some of the information about the project the night or like the week of the election, and like the days after I was pretty raw, and I wasn't responding to a lot of work emails in general just because I couldn't handle it. And JD had messaged me back saying, "Hey, just checking in because you hadn't messaged me back." And his additional thing was like, "I realize this week is like the worst because of what happened on Tuesday. So, take your time, take what you need. I get it." And that's when, like, between that and seeing kind of what their plans were for the book, that made me feel really confident about the people I'd be working with at Space Goat.
That's super cool. I love that story. That's also just great that they reached out to you because they like knew your critical work and perspective.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of that had to do with JD. I give him so much credit because again, he's a very thoughtful person, and he's very much about pulling new voices into comics. It's something that we've talked about privately in terms of me recommending other people for other things and that sort of thing. And I think it was actually I don't think this is the only thing, because I think he was following my work, my critical work too, but he's cited my article where I wrote about Jughead coming out as Ace in the Jughead comic as being one of the pieces that he's really liked for me. And I think that might be one of the reasons why I was pulled into this project, because as you're going to find out in issue 4, which is again coming out on Wednesday, we specifically have Sue, one of the main characters, talk about being asexual. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's really nice to have collaborators who have seen my critical work and see how it can apply to my creative work.
Totally. Well, I love the story actually of how you got started writing and reading and involved in comics in the first place. If you want to share that a little bit too.
Yeah, it's funny because I did a signing. I was a part of the Halloween Comic Fest, it was this past Saturday, but it's like Free Comic Book Day, but for Halloween and spooky comics. And so I did a little signing in Chicago, and there was a teenage girl who came up to me and was kind of shy, and she said, like, it's so great that you're making comics, but I haven't been reading them for very long. I've only been reading for a couple of years. And I told her, like, I've only been reading them for about 5 years. So I totally get it. It's fine. You're doing great. You're reading them. That's good. So I think I was always a big superhero growing up. I mean, I loved Batman the Animated Series. I loved the Justice League cartoon, the Superman cartoon, the X-Men, Spider-Man, all that. But I never felt like comics could be for me because, when I was growing up in the 90s, all the comic art really screamed not for Katie, which is sad because then I found out later that a lot of the cartoons I really liked had comic book adaptations and continuations of the story, but you never saw those never got to me. So I only found out way later that there were stories being made with me in mind, and they just never got to me. Yeah, which is still a problem, but the internet helps. So it was only really once I started watching, like in the last few years, I think it was actually the Young Justice cartoon. I was really getting into that, And I happened to see a lot, like a fandom growing on Tumblr for the show. And from there, I was already reviewing TV and movies by that point, but I wasn't even reading comics, let alone reviewing them. But once I got into the Young Justice fandom, there were a lot of people who were also recommending old series, or they were showing screenshots of older comics that reminded them of the parts of the characters that they liked from the cartoons. So I started getting into comics really through there, and then pretty soon after that was when I got into a lot of the DC comics, the better of the New 52 DC comics, and from there I started reviewing, and then by the time I was in the middle of reviewing comics was when the DCU stuff came out, which was stuff I really loved. And then I was writing for panels.net, which ended up it was the Sister Cipher book riot, and then it kind of became book riot again. I really liked the stuff that I wrote for there, and then I started writing for Comics Alliance not too long afterwards. I'd been writing for the Mary Sue for general pop culture stuff as well. And then, so it's been a really interesting few years, because I went from, not that long ago, not reading comics at all, to now not only writing about them, but writing them. So it's been an interesting, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years of my life.
That's amazing. I love that. It's like you got a little bit into it, and then you were all the way into it.
Isn't it funny how that seems to happen? It's like, this thing I wasn't the thing that like I felt like I had no claim in, suddenly I'm knowledgeable in it, which is always a really interesting part of getting into like a new thing.
And what an amazing gateway drug Young Justice turned out to be for so many people.
Absolutely. It's funny because I've gotten to interview Greg Weisman, who co-created it, and I told him before the interview started, like, just so you know, you're kind of the reason why, like, you're one of the big reasons why I review. This was even before before any of my books came out. This was just when I was reviewing stuff. But I was like, yeah, you're kind of the reason why I got into comics. Like, you're a big part of that. And he was like, oh, wow, okay. I was like, okay, now let's start the interview.
Yeah. Well, it's like the TV show that, like, the network canceled because too many girls liked it, ended up getting lots of girls to read comics. Who could have guessed?
Right. But yeah, I'm excited to see. I'm excited, but not getting my hopes up too much for what the new season will be. Only because, like, I don't want to anticipate it doing one thing and then it doing a completely different thing, because that was very much what season 2 already did. So I'm taking it with kind of similarly to Twin Peaks in terms of like this last season of just letting it happen. And I can kind of decide how I feel about it, but not anticipating too much of guessing what will happen, and just enjoying the ride.
Yeah, it's sort of like I didn't put any time into pre-gaming to begin to watch Star Trek. Like, I know what my agenda is from what I wanted from Star Trek, but I knew that me thinking about it before the show came out wasn't going to make a difference, really. I do think that the fan conversation around but I do think that the fan conversations that we've had in the big lead up to both Young Justice Season 3 and to the relaunch of Star Trek did contribute to both shows making some level of commitment to having better diverse representation of LGBTQ people, which is obviously something that matters a lot to both of us.
Yeah, I think. But I know Greg Weisman has talked a little bit about it, and I know that some of it is the fact that there's, with the networks and everything, it can be tricky. And I'm hoping that with the new, I forget which, I think it's the DC, I think it's through the DC streaming service, but I'm hoping, considering that the CW shows, for better or for worse, have had at least on-screen queer representation, that hopefully that hopefully they'll be able to put more concrete representation in Young Justice. So I'm optimistic, but again, we'll have to see.
Well, definitely, you say Space Goat as a publisher that knows that there's an audience that really wants this, and like went out from the start to say that it was something that you wanted your series to feature, like regardless of the specific tone and approach that it was going to have. So, like, what are your? I mean, this is something we talk about a lot on the show, but I just think you do such a good job articulating this as well as like the significance, really, of having LGBTQ characters in a comic that can be read by people who are young. And it's, looking at the art style, like it's clearly intended to be read by people of a wide range of ages. I kind of think that it has some of the same bones as like the good Archie and Veronica stuff, and the characters are all LGBTQ.
Yeah, I think that the importance for it is that, and we're seeing it obviously a lot this week because of like certain news stories, unfortunately, but this idea that LGBTQA people are like that the very concept is not kid friendly is so damaging for kids that either that they don't find out about it at all until they're much older, which obviously can mean that they're losing out on something that they connect to, or where they know about it but that it's shameful, that it's seen as something overtly sexual instead of just a part of who you like, a part of who you are as a person outside of what you do in the bedroom, and just also, like I said, just getting kids to understand what these different orientations mean and what they feel like, and just educating kids on what that's like, so that if they feel that way, then they can better understand their feelings. But also just for kids who don't feel that way, to just have those concepts for better empathy.
Yeah.
It's something that I wanted to show in Moonlighters, especially having them. I think coming out stories are really important, and I get why so many people go to them, especially when they come from a place of truth for them, when they're pulling from their own life. But I also think that there's an importance to show stories where they're already out, and that but that these things still come up because they're a part of their lives, because they think there's too much focus on, well, how do we have this organically come up? And it's not as if there are certainly ways. I think I described it in a recent interview that there are ways to gracefully say exposition in general in dialogue, and that's the thing that you as a writer need to learn. And it's the exact same thing with making representation overt on the page when it comes to characters talking about who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a really charming scene in issue 3 where a character talks about what it was like when he came out. So like, and in a really like very sweet, and like reassuring kind of a way. And it's used to further the plot, and you already know he's gay before that scene, but it was a cool touch
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was the first time we specifically say it, but it's also a character where it just comes off on the page. To the point where like a friend of mine who read the book, and I said like, oh yeah, this character's going to talk specifically about being gay, and it's the first time he's actually saying it. And my friend was like, well, yeah, but I mean, I read the book. I know. Like, the character is pretty clear. Even if we hadn't talked, even if I hadn't talked in other interviews about the character's orientations anyway. Yeah, it was important for me for that scene. The character relates his coming out, because he's talking about his coming out experience, and he's talking to someone who isn't in the process of coming out themselves, but is dealing with another massive change in their life. And so I thought that it would be an interesting way to go about it, where it wasn't necessarily him mentoring another queer person, which is still really good. Like, I do care about those stories a lot, but I like the idea of him relating this very scary part of his life that ended up being a good thing to this unrelated thing that another person's going through, that he knew once they got through it, they would be okay. And I thought that was a nice way. That was a nice way to have him talk about it, again, in a way that felt true to life for me. I really like that scene, and I really like issue 3 and issue 4. I love all the issues, don't get me wrong, but issue 3 and issue 4 are my favorite because they're the most, all the fun stuff happens in them, and also they were the two issues where characters got to talk about their orientation.
Yeah, and how it fits in with their lives, and that's very true. And the first 2 issues, you're basically setting up the world. You're doing world building, where you establish that, like, monsters are real. Most people who aren't monsters don't see them because they're not paying attention, which I think is an interesting sort of metaphor for heteronormality assumptions, that, even when people are surrounded by queerness, they have sort of a blinders to, and make assumptions that everyone is going to be a certain way or whatever. And I read that as a metaphor. I figure you probably also
I will take the metaphor. One of the main reasons I did that was also just because I wanted Renee, who is a new werewolf, who has recently been not a werewolf and then turned into a werewolf. I wanted to make sure they were all going to the same college, and so it made sense that even though in this arc, and fingers crossed, because it's still not 100% confirmed when and if we're getting a second arc, but it's looking positive. I can at least say that much. But for at least this arc, it's just, there's so much going on. I haven't gotten to actually show them at school, but I wanted to make sure that I set up that if I wanted them to make sure that they were all going to the same college. And if they're all going to the same college, then it would be really tricky to have Renee not figure it out before now, unless we had a Harry Potter-esque, they just don't notice. It just kind of they don't see the magical qualities. So yeah, it was, but yeah, you're absolutely right though, with issue 1 and 2, so much of it was setting things up, and just trying to get all of the rules set up, and then of course getting Renee's story going, because that's a big part of the book, was just her start as a werewolf.
That's cool. No, that's a good way to deal with it. And I liked that metaphor. I mean, this story is very much in line with like contemporary urban fantasy, but it's also very much like a humor and light tone. I mean, it's not a horror book at all. It's a comedy book that features monsters, basically. It's a comedy and relationships book.
Yeah, there's a little bit of spookier, scarier stuff coming, just a little. But largely, I like the idea of monsters being fun and sweet and nice. I always liked the random like Hanna-Barbera cartoons where they were like, what if like this monster was actually a really nice person instead of mean, and that sort of thing. And I think there's something really interesting, and it's not just obviously with Moonlighters. I've seen it more often happen, but especially with werewolves, where female creators are really taking back werewolves and putting a spin on them. And usually it's, a lot of it is queer female creators where it's taking these monsters that are so often seen as like super macho or like because they're hairy, like it's hard for creators to like sexualize them unless they go like unless it's like a really, really specific fetish for them. And so then they're like, well, how do we market these monsters for like these female monsters? Well, I guess we'll just have them be, we'll just do male werewolves. And I think it's really interesting to see like a lot of independent projects take werewolves and have them be like a largely female cast and seeing where it goes from there. I think I'm going to shout out a friend of mine who we've basically bonded over our werewolf books. Kel McDonald, who did an anthology recently, Can I Pet Your Werewolf? And it's largely, I think it might be all female creators or largely female creators, but they're all, again, very like sweet werewolf stories that put a lot of humanity into the werewolves.
I definitely think you're right about like, in any kind of fiction or fantasy that comes from men generally, like they're unwilling to have female characters that don't turn them personally on, and therefore in the vast majority of circumstances, the only acceptable form of monsters for women are like sirens or vampires, and only have to be the pretty kinds that are pretty to them in their particular aesthetics. So it's definitely like, okay, like women are going to have hair growing out of lots of places right now. And that's part of what's happening in this. It is like a really radical feminist thing to have in a story. Yeah, and
I can never shout out Cal's work on the book enough. Cal does both the line art and the coloring work, and they did such a good job with the initial designs of the characters because they feel like real human beings, and they're body diverse, which was something that I was really hoping for. And they don't feel like they're catering to a straight male audience. And I really like the fact that, and their werewolf forms are also they're very sleek and they're not sexualized, and their personalities just come through 100% in a way that it just makes me really proud to write for the book, because Cal always brings their A game and really, really brings interesting touches to the characters that highlight the parts of their personality I'm trying to get through the script. So
I mean, I definitely love the adorable domestic dog, ness quality of it. There's a lot of fun, and you definitely see like these dogs look like these characters are truly themselves and clearly themselves in both forms,
Yeah.
I mean, the character who's just gotten her werewolf powers is struggling with that more, but for the characters who've been this way their whole lives, like you can see the way they sort of change in and out is a very natural and fun thing.
With sparkles, by the way, which was something we added when Cal was coloring the first issue. They were like, I think I'm going to add sparkles. And I went, you go and add sparkles. We'll have sparkly werewolves. That works for me.
Yes, there's no reason for them not to be sparkly. So they were. With the particular like character designs and profiles, is that something that you and the artists developed together, or how did you guys sort of develop the cast?
So I had done, besides I'd done basic outlines for each of the chapters through my pitch, but I'd also done little character profiles where I'd taken some of the notes that they had originally given me for like their ideas for the characters, but I'd really developed them more. And I don't think I had specifically said the body types of each of the characters, but I did kind of describe each of their what I thought for their ethnicities and their general personality. And I believe in my notes just said I just really want a really diverse body different. What's the word I'm thinking of? Like just different body types. And when Cal came back, there were very few changes from their initial design. I think more it's just that over the course of doing the book, they've slightly changed just how they've been drawing the characters themselves. But the only thing I think I changed was Meg is supposed to be more of, Meg the leader is supposed to be more of a pear shape, and Meg was there with it, but I had simply add a little bit more of a belly, have her arms, like her upper arms have a little more weight to them, because as someone who was once much more athletic and then gained weight and is now pretty strictly a pear shape myself, I really wanted to highlight the fact that shape exists and that she can still be really appealing and such a beautiful character. And Cal was like, "Oh, that sounds great," and immediately added it in. So besides that, I mean, really, I think Cal and I have been on a lot of the same page really early on in terms of the characters and what we're going for with it. And I feel really lucky that I have an artist who I don't have to ask them to change much in terms of really anything. And honestly, there are lots of panels in the books where I thought, oh, that's not even how I imagined that, but that's so much better. So yes, let's go with that. That looks great.
That's really cool. But when you're beginning a new series, you have a core cast of characters of 4 different characters. Did you have sort of inspiration for the kind of personality types you wanted to see? I personally happen to strongly associate Felipe with a certain person who you and I both know from the comics critical community, which I have to assume is not a coincidence.
So here's the thing. I'm not going to say it's a coincidence. This is what happened. So Felipe was brought about, the idea of Felipe was brought about because the person that we both know, who is John Eric Christensen, who is delightful, and he's one of my favorite people in comics criticism, but has talked many times about how while he's really happy to see lots of female friendship stories, and even to a point male friendship stories in comics, like queer male friendships, a lot of what he had experienced when he was a kid and as a teenager was being a gay guy surrounded by a lot of strong female friendships. And he had talked multiple times just about how he wanted to see more stories like that, along with all the other ones. It's never I want this replaced with this. It's more of, yes, and also can I have this? And so when I was writing this, I thought, oh, this is a good opportunity to have that kind of dynamic. So I'd written Felipe to have that kind of relationship with the other main cast members. And he was also one of the other requirements that Space Ghost had given me was that they wanted one of the characters to be a Were-Corgi. And so I was thinking okay, let's have Felipe be the Were-Corgi, and his that personality is really sweet and fun, and kind. And so and again, I kind of had John Eric in mind, even though I think John Eric is a little more sardonic in a good way.
Yeah.
Because again, he's lovely. But so I given those character profiles to Cal, And Cal came back, and suddenly I'm looking at a character that looks just like John Eric, and I went, oh wow, this is really. I told Cal, like, this is really weird. I like, this looks just like someone who inspired the character. And Cal came back with, oh, I based Felipe off of a friend of mine from high school, who is not John Eric, by the way. So there's someone else who must look like John Eric out in the world. But
there's parallel Earth versions.
Yeah, something like he must have a cosmic twin or something. So I was kind of laughing at that. And so when the character designs and I think the cover was revealed, not only did John Eric notice, but then he said, "Oh my gosh, I have that outfit that Felipe is wearing on the first cover," and John Eric immediately put it on and took a selfie. And so I'm like, "Oh, good, you can cosplay already." So
that's amazing.
It still makes me laugh. It was a complete magical coincidence that my character happens to look like one of the real life people that inspired him. So
that's so cool. Well, the characters definitely I feel like very real, relatable people for readers, I imagine, or certainly for me.
I hope so. I've gotten to only, because it's digital first. I've only really gotten to see some of the reaction from it. A lot of them from like people who are already my friends. So I know they mean it. But it's also like, okay, but you're also saying this because you like me. Getting to do the signing this weekend. There were a lot of people there that didn't know the comic, that just saw that I was doing a signing and picked up the free issue. But more than one person came in that were local, that had read the book online and were saying how much they liked it. So that was just really nice to get that reaction from people. So
yeah, definitely. Well, you're someone who has another, as a story, a graphic novel you're also working on right now that is certainly an all ages or even a youth title. And I don't know. I mean, like, what are your thoughts about writing for youthful audiences?
It's one of those things where as you said at the beginning when you were introducing me, I run a Steven Universe podcast. When Steven Universe is on, which we found out today it's finally coming back.
When's it coming back?
November 10th through that on the CW app, or not CW, the CN app.
Cartoon Network app.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not the CW app would be surprising.
I know. I was like, wow, that's multi-level.
But yeah, apparently they're putting it on the app first, and then they're gonna show it on the regular channel in December, which is that's fine. So I do that. I'm a fan of like cartoons. I'm a fan of kids media in general. So a lot of this is stuff that I already like to watch and read. So it's not too far off to then get into the mindset of writing it. And it is very much a lot of it is what would I wanted to read as a kid. So, and then like, what also do I want to read now?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I always try to read stuff for adults. So my perspective of like what age range is for what is like particularly weird. Because I didn't read any YA stuff till I was a grown up. I was like just deeply, deeply pretentious. So I guess my question for you, given my lack of insight in these areas, is, obviously I've enjoyed the comics, but like, what kind of age range do you recommend Moonlighters for? I think it's age appropriate for all ages, but that doesn't mean that kids below a certain age would necessarily like get the jokes or relate or be interested in the college setting or, things like that. Like,
yeah.
Of a sense of what ages you recommend for it?
I feel like preteen and teen in particular, like junior high, high school would probably be a pretty strong, especially preteen, because I feel like this is, again, it's kind of on the cartoonish side. But at the same time, I think you're right that there's a lot of it that even if like some of the jokes might go over younger kids' heads, it's still very much appropriate for them. It's a tricky book, which I probably should figure out since I'm writing it. But it's a tricky book to kind of peg down because the characters are in college. So like whether or not it officially counts as a YA book, because I don't think this is ever said in the comic, but I think Sue's like 18 or 19, and then the rest of them are like 20 or 21. So, not all of them are teenagers anymore, so does it count as YA and that sort of thing. But at the same time, it's one of those things also where, so when my understanding of what a lot of like teens and preteens like to read is about stories of characters that are a little bit older than them, so like them having adventures. So I feel like really, yeah, like the 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 range is a pretty good age range. And then, of course, anybody who wants to read it, please read this book.
Certainly. I feel like one of the possible things I would try, I gave away comics for my trick-or-treaters. In my building, all the kids do trick-or-treating on Saturday to accommodate their parents' schedules. It's kind of hilarious. I'm confused as to why this is surprising for outsiders, apparently. But anyway, in my building, all the kids came by on Saturday. And my feeling is like, if you show a kid a comic and they look like they want to read it, then then they should just read it. Like, if it looks like it speaks to them, then they should read it. And like, if you have to explain a couple words because the vocabulary is a little bit above their pay grade, so to speak, then you'll explain those couple words. But like, I feel like a lot of the time, like, sort of art is what determines if a kid wants to like look at a story or not. Are the pictures interesting to him or her or them?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, frankly, I've seen some people read Moonlighters, and then when they are describing what happens in it, they get some of the details wrong. Like, and this is not me like putting down the person, because they did a like I saw someone randomly do a vlog on the Halloween Comic Fest books that they picked up, and they were describing Moonlighters, but they said that Renee was a veterinarian, and I said, and I was like, no, and I think it's because there was a plot point in the first issue where she has cat treats because she volunteers at a cat shelter or at an animal shelter. So I think that it confused them. So my point is that I'm not as worried about some of the dialogue going over kids' heads, because apparently for some adults, some of the reading the comic, not every piece of dialogue necessarily sticks. So there's only so much. I also
think like your brain kind of fills it in to make sense. Like, it doesn't strike me like that somebody might have cat treats with them doesn't strike me as like anything I'd question even. Like, some people have cat treats with them. That's a thing. I don't see that as a plot hole.
I think one of the reasons why I wrote that in was because we wanted to establish, it was more that we wanted to establish Renee as the high achieving student she is, but we didn't have a lot of time to talk about all of her interests besides showing that she tutors, because she was walking home from tutoring when her werewolf attack happens in the first issue. And so I was trying to figure out another way to kind of highlight that she does a lot of volunteering, a lot of other hobbies. And so that was, I think, if I'm recalling right, it was the chicken before the egg, not the egg before the chicken in that. So the cat treats came about so that I had a reason for her to describe like other things that she does to get more of her personality. And then it just so happened that it helps be a plot point in the book.
Yeah. I do also feel like there's sort of a moment now. We're having like a cute monsters moment in a lot of the indie and like youth-oriented comics of the day.
Yeah. I wonder if think some of it's connected to, especially with like queer literature. I mean, I feel like the whole gay Babadook thing has to be part of it. Like, and there's of course a time-honored tradition of people empathizing and rooting for the monsters, whether they're just misunderstood or whether they're seeking revenge. But I also feel like with these kinds of stories, there's something really fun about having the monsters be the sweethearts. And one of the things I like about writing this series is the juxtaposition between this kind of fantasy magical world and the fact that these characters can transform into basically animals, and all the like amazing creatures and magical folk that they meet, but they do like the most boring odd jobs. And really, like, for me, that's the fun part was kind of balancing like these really interesting designs that Cal has, but also having like my characters sweeping leaves or in the next issue, in issue 4, they're cleaning stables and doing or like dog washing. So it's kind of fun to have these kind of zany adventures, but them having to do kind of boring jobs that any normal person would have to do as well.
I associated cleaning the stables immediately with the Herculean task of cleaning the Nemean stables from Hercules' trials.
Yeah, that was 100%. When I was trying to brainstorm when I was coming up with each of the issues, because I really wanted to have a good baseline when I was sending in my pitch for it. I sent in exactly the different things that they would have to do in each issue, and that was really me trying to do a different flavor of monster, and trying to just do my best to kind of balance out. Okay, in this one, like in issue 3, they deal with a mother-daughter Medusa, and their dog, which just happens to be also themed after Greek stuff. And before that, they were raking for gnomes for this like cute gnome couple. And so for issue 4, I was just thinking, what other magical creatures could they interact with? And yeah, it was absolutely the Herculean task of cleaning the stable, which is like one of the more boring of the Herculean tasks, which I thought was kind of, again, a fun way of pulling in interesting illusions, but also still having it be very much them doing the odd jobs that actual college students might have to pick up in their free time.
Yeah, it's very relatable that way, but I definitely saw that referenced immediately. Had you been in the practice of writing much fiction before you began working on this project?
So I had already completely finished Cardboard Kingdom by the time this started. So I had that set up before. Before that, I had done fan fiction and also like fiction in college because I was a creative writing major. So I had a background in writing stories. But it really honestly wasn't until I got into like Tumblr. The same time I got around into comics was the same time that I was actually kind of dabbling in fan fiction, simply just because I was feeling kind of creatively in a slump, and I just wanted to practice, and I was and like the characters that I was interested in writing about, I just wanted to do some writing for them. And then I got so busy with reviewing stuff that I didn't really get to write fiction then anymore. And then
yep, I know that feeling.
Yeah, I know, right?
So actually, not that I was reading fiction beforehand, but I definitely can't I can't imagine writing fiction on top of writing critical work. It's like
it was about like when Comics Alliance was still a thing. It was definitely a careful balance, but it was always a little leaning towards stressful, a little too stressful. But yeah, and then the interest. It's been 2.5 years now since I found out that my eventual collaborator, Chad Sell, was looking for multiple people to write this graphic novel with him. And it was going to be a kid's graphic novel, and he just wanted, he said, like, it doesn't matter if you've never published before. I want to see what stories people want to tell about this, with this concept I'm doing. And I think it only took me maybe like 20 minutes for me to come up with a concept. I immediately sent it in, and I thought, well, I really hope that it was strong enough, because it was a very quick thought process for me. And he liked it enough to talk to me he called me on the phone and was like, look, I think that it's really interesting. It's definitely one that is in the running. Can we flesh it out a little more and see where it goes with it? And then by the time the phone call ended, similarly to Moonlighters, actually, I ended the phone call. I went up to my partner and I said, I'm going to be really, really upset if I don't get this thing now, because I'm very excited to work on it. And then I think a few weeks later, he had officially sent out the email saying, hey, I want you on this project. And it was him, me, and 9 other people who essentially created this full story, this full graphic novel about kids in their community in their neighborhoods during the summer, playing and having adventures and using their imagination. And that's the card. I don't know if I during the story mentioned that this is the Cardboard Kingdom, which is my graphic novel coming out next year.
Let's mention that.
Yeah.
Cardboard Kingdom, which folks can begin to put in orders for, which is you've got like a big publisher on that book too.
Yeah, Knopf. So Knopf Books for Young Readers, I think, is the official imprint for it. It's big. I had some small panic attacks when we got the word out that they were interested in buying it. It's been, like I said, by the time it gets printed next June, it's going to be June 5th. It will have been 3 years of us, more or less 3 years of us doing this book together. But it's been done, my part of it's been done for well over a year and well, really even like almost 2 years now. Even though the interesting about it is that we all sent in our scripts, we revised the scripts. Like Chad is technically a co-writer on all of them because he helped each of us come up with the concept for each of our chapters. But then we all have been working together. We've had a kind of private Facebook group where we've all worked together. We've all edited each other's chapters. We've all contributed to extra chapters that kind of filled in parts of the story that we felt like needed a little bit extra after all of our chapters for our particular characters were done. I'm hoping I'm explaining this well, because I realize I need to start getting really good at explain this project, because so that I can get people to buy the book. It was 100% a really fluid collaboration where everybody seemed to be on the same page, and we were all really supportive of each other, and we all knew what tones we wanted to create. And a lot of this was Chad too, because Chad really set a good leadership tone and kept the group organized. And I've been describing it as a small miracle that we all got the right people in the right parts of the book at the right time. And not enough can be said also for our editors at Knopf. They gave us, once we sent in the book. It was largely done and only partially colored at that point. I think Chad was still in the middle of working on colors when we had originally pitched it. But they had come back with several like good edits, which is always such a blessing when editors know what you're going for and get the project and then just want to make the book better. By the time we had officially sent in the like final PDF of the book after all the edits and re-edits and then the proofreading because they needed all the grammar to be like really precise. But after everything was said and done and I've read through it again, it's the strongest the book's ever been, and it's just been a really exciting like story creating process for me. I feel like I feel like I've talked about the book for years, but I literally have. And I'm even though it's still I think about a half a year away, I'm just so happy that we're getting very close to it being out in the world. So I'm getting I'm starting to get very excited about getting to talk about it more.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean that cover when you released it, it was really clearly a fun and inclusive and creative concept and cover that was coming on a week where we just heard a couple of people from youth publishing try to defend having non-diverse.
It was the same day.
It was the same day.
The exact same day. And I was laughing because I was like, meanwhile, over on my Twitter, here's this book that I made that's like, and the funny thing is that we have such a large cast that we couldn't get all of the kids on the front of the book. The rest of them, they're going to be on the back, and I've seen the back cover. It's really adorable. I was like, don't you think we can cram a few more kids in there? And I think it was more Knopf going, this is the exact amount of kids on the front of the book that will sell the most. I'm like, okay, you guys know covers. They were very specific about the color of the sky and and adjusting the logo from what we had originally done. I'm like, if that helps get the book into more kids' hands, helps get more eyes on it, then that's fine by me. But if you thought that the characters that got on the front cover feel really inclusive and diverse, the entire cast is so much more, and I'm just super excited for everybody to get to meet these characters, not just my own, but that's the thing. It's one of those projects where there's so many collaborators that had their own thing going that we kind of all came together. So I feel really good about being able to sing praises for the book because it's not just mine, and I can point to everybody else's work on it and how genius it was. And then I'm like, and also I was there, and I think mine's pretty good too. But also, have you checked out that character or this character? So. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, that's going to be fun. Well, we're coming up on an hour, which is usually about when we wrap. Do you want to make sure folks know how they can read your comics and order the upcoming graphic novel?
Sure. You can get Cardboard Kingdom really anywhere where you can usually pre-order books. I know that Amazon and Barnes & Noble have right now some pretty good deals on pre-orders for the book, but if you want to, by all means, if you want to go to your independent local bookstore and order it, you should be able to. It's, like I said, it's called The Cardboard Kingdom, and it's being made by Knopf. And besides that, Moonlighters right now is digital first. So that is going to be on Amazon Comixology. We are going to do a print run for the full volume. basically once we finish it, I am working on edits on the 6th script this week actually. So and then Cal's working on actually the art on issue 5 right now. So it's slowly coming together. We're thinking early next year we should be getting the print volume squared away. But in the meantime, you can get it digitally. And then issue 4 comes out on November 1st, which I think is I don't know, is that the day that the podcast is releasing, or is that going to be tomorrow?
The podcast is live, and then it'll also be downloadable. I usually say this at the end of the podcast, but I'll say it now at the same time. So this podcast is listenable live. If you perhaps came in late to it and want to listen to it from the beginning, it'll all be up on our website, at Blog Talk Radio's website, in another couple hours. We'll be on iTunes in another couple hours, and we'll be on SoundCloud and Stitcher probably around tomorrow. So you can listen to the show from the beginning then at Graphic Policy on any of those platforms for podcasts. I'm
glad I was able to help you transition to that part.
Very easy transition.
But like I said, issue 4 is basically my favorite of all the issues for this arc. So I'm very excited for it to finally be out in the world, and I hope everybody enjoys it. Fabulous.
And where can folks find you on the internet in general?
Largely, I tend to be on Twitter too much, and you can find me there at just plain tweets. Besides that, you can usually find out about my stuff on katieschenkel.com, which I tend to try to keep that up to date. I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/justplainsomething. And then I have a couple podcasts I'm on right now. Like I said, Steven Universe is coming back, so I'll be doing Crystal Clods with Elle Collins through her Intuit podcast feed. And then I also run a Supergirl podcast with Chris Haley on the Keep It Close to Me podcast feed that he has. And so far I think those are all my main projects at the moment. It's really hard to keep track of them most of the time.
Well, I'm always here to check it out and happy to keep on tabs with it. So thank you for joining us, and I'm sure we'll have you back on the show sometime soon to talk about other art, or perhaps talk between ourselves about what we think about Young Justice Season 3, perhaps, when that comes to pass, or something along those lines.
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me this time.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Katie. And for our listeners, next week we don't have somebody set yet for Monday. Oh my goodness, or do we? No, Monday we do not. I know in the upcoming weeks we'll be having a special guest on to talk with us about the history of Marvel Comics, and we have our Star Trek Discovery episode coming up during the season break. Sure, that'll be taping in mid-November, but we will be back with you guys on Monday with more. So signing off, this is Ilana. You can find me on Twitter all the damn time, ELANA_Brooklyn on Twitter, and we're always here at graphicpolicy.com, on Graphic Policy at Twitter, Graphic Policy Facebook. We like to keep it nice and simple, and you can sign up for our email newsletter, find out when all of our new articles can come up, when our new posts come up, and our YouTube shows and everything else that we bring to you in Graphic Policy land. So until next week, keep it geeky, and don't forget to vote on Tuesday, November 7th. If you live in most places in America, you probably have an election. See you then.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games. you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.